Welcome to another episode of the Lazy Equity Podcast. Today, Justin and I are going to be jumping into a couple of questions that the audience have sent through via our social channels around particularly investing in property, where to invest, what sort of budgets to consider when investing, what a salary income will allow for. What other things do we have there, Just?
Things around buying in a trust or personal name. There's things like rentvesting versus buying an owner-occupier and upgrading it multiple times.
And a couple of other things that are attached to this sort of topic. So let's jump into it. So question number one was, we got this one come through from Instagram, and it was rentvesting versus upgrading your PPOR or your principal place of residence multiple times to build wealth through investing. So is it better to buy your home, renovate that, create the capital, and then move to another investment? I'm guessing that's what the question is. What's your take on that?
So lots of unpacks with that one. I say rentvesting, it's not a means to an end. I think that's where people kind of have that misconception. If they start renting, they're renting forever. Rentvesting is just a tool to get you where you want to go much quicker. So obviously, instead of putting a massive outlay for stamp duty for your own occupier, you can obviously take that money, invest it elsewhere in areas that could be growing a lot faster. So renting does actually usually work out cheaper or more cost effective than actually owning a place. And it's not just throwing that money away on Uber Eats or anything, it's taking that excess money and investing it, multiplying it in a much quicker way. And also I think the perception around rent investing, where that actually came from, or renting is dead money, it came from a time where the average house price was only 3 times the income of the average Australian. Now it's 10 times, and that's just of the average household in Australia, not the blue chip areas as well. People could only buy in their backyards. So it was much more, I guess, a negative perception then, whereas people now have access to the internet, they can understand how economics work in regards to multiplying through investing. So it's changing that perception and where this has all come from. Rather than have a negative consultation, use it as a tool to get you where you want to go much quicker.
I agree with you, but I'm going to play devil's advocate on this one because there's a lot of different incentives around purchasing a home as well. And you can typically get into, especially at the moment, with the whole 5% guarantee scheme with the lender's mortgage insurance being waived, you're able to get into a higher cost property at a smaller deposit size and not have to incur the lender's mortgage insurance. So on that front, you're able to then get into a market which may be a $1.2 or $1.3 million market. Specifically, this would probably be for New South Wales because the cap is up to 1.5 at the moment. And that allows somebody to, or actually, let's just use the example of 1.5. They purchase a property at $1.5 million. It's in a market which is not growing as aggressively in a percentage value, but because of the cost of the property or the value of the property, it doesn't have to grow as much to create the equity that's available. So if you put a 10% or let's go a 5% gain on a $1.5 million property, you're going to be making $75,000 in equity on that first year, which is a great return, but how do you release it? So backing off the devil's advocate now, if you want to release that equity, you need to actually create income somehow. And typically people do that by their salary, but an investment property creates rental income. And that's the other tool that allows you to use the equity inside your property because it is contributing towards your income. And we know that banks look at your income to be able to extract that equity and service your loan for the next purchases. So depending on who you are, this is obviously the things that I think it really comes down to is that if you are a high income earner and you can get serviced and you don't need to put your capital into investment properties and you've got a very comfortable cushioned life, then absolutely go for a property that is beneficial to the purchasing climates at the time. At the moment, like I said, $1.5 million without lender's mortgage insurance on a 5% deposit inside New South Wales would help you as your home, but not everybody is that demographic. You know, everybody's also trying to create their nest egg and potentially, not everybody can afford to buy those types of properties.
Yeah, completely agree. The biggest benefit when it comes to an owner-occupier is no capital gains tax. It's the only asset class in the world where you can make huge amounts of profit and not pay a cent of tax on. So if you've lived in that property for one day, you've now got 6 years of capital gains tax exemption. And then obviously when that basically comes to an end, all you have to do is move back in for maybe another day or two, and then it re-triggers that again. I see a lot of people obviously buying, going to a property, renovate, add value, then sell it for a huge profit and not pay a cent of capital gains tax. The negative of an owner-occupier though, it's all post-tax dollars that you're paying down. So nothing's tax deductible. And say you take out a $2 million loan over 30 years, 5% interest rate, that's $4 million. And that's, you really have to make about $7 million, $3 million goes to tax, the other $4 million is to pay down a $2 million loan. And again, it's all post-tax dollars. So it's stuff coming straight out of your pocket. Simplest way I look at it is you can buy an owner-occupier, grows to $3 million, and you might own it outright, but you still have to go to work. It's not generating you any income. So it's not bringing you any money. You still have to keep trading time for money. You own a $3 million investment property at a 5% yield. That's generating now $150,000 a year income. You can live where you want to live or use that to pay down the mortgage on the place you're buying. But it's just how you want to structure it, how you want to kind of go about it as well. Do you want to buy and just obviously keep adding value to keep moving forward, or have that investment property? But again, obviously, peace of mind is what's really important to a lot of people as well. People like the idea of just having that security, live in a place that they own. They don't have to worry about rental increases, anything of that sort as well. So sometimes that is a little bit benefit that pushes people over the line to that way.
Yeah, it is. But also, if people do want to eventually retire, what cash flow they're going to be retiring on, because it's all good to make the money. And if it is your PPR and you do have those capital gains tax benefits rather than not being there, then yes, great. But when that runs out, do you have your income coming in? It's a question, I guess, that is very circumstantial to each individual. But personally, and obviously we're in the business of it, investing is going to be the safer route forward because you don't know what the economic climate's going to bring forward.
So, as Robert Kiyosaki says, you're owner-occupier, the house you live in is a liability. If it doesn't generate you income, it's a liability. If it takes money out of your pocket, liability. If it puts money in your pocket, it's an asset. So
yeah, exactly. Cool. All right, number 2, the next question we had on the list was, we're a low-income earning couple. What should our next investment move be? We both earn $65,000. What would you say?
Right, 2 ways you can go about this. I'd say firstly, you need to buy something to manufacture the growth. You can buy something, do a quick cosmetic renovation, subdivision, whatever it might be. And that's a good way to obviously boost those capital returns or capital needed to be able to get to the next one. Secondly, there's always joint ventures. So you might be able to partner up with somebody that does have money. You might have serviceability and obviously work together that way. It might be family, friends, whatever it is. Find those projects where you can keep moving forward. Another way that might be a bit left wing, but even investing in yourself, try and get a high income skill to obviously increase that. Obviously, as you start to get a high income skill, then you can go into multiplying it through investments, and then you move to that passive income. So it's either investing in yourself to upskill yourself to go do it, or manufacturing growth, joint ventures. There's always a way to keep moving forward.
I think underneath the lending umbrella, if we work it out for a couple that are displaying those sorts of figures for their income, it's quite important to understand how the banks assess you. So quickly pull up my calculator, and on a partnership going into a servicing amount, if the second partner at a $65,000 income is being assessed, and let's put it at a 90% lend, they'll be assessed at a $58,000 income plus the original $65,000 from the first lender. Multiply that by 6, gives them a servicing amount of around $738,000. Now, that is going to help them to get a first asset together, but I think it's really important here because they're going to be taking on quite a lot of debt at a very low income. Now, we always know, and just pretty much as we spoke about there, if you're going into a asset that doesn't create enough cash flow to release that equity for the next purchase, then you're going to be a little bit struggling. So these guys would really want to focus on a low-cost asset with a very high yield. It's very difficult to find that these days inside the property markets in Australia. So it does mean that they're going to have to potentially look at quality assets that are quite low and in very, very low demographic areas that are potentially poised for strong gentrification into the future, but it does mean that you're going to be probably putting up with a bit of a difficult property and difficult tenants at that stage. So while they're serviced at $738,000, it's always advised to understand what your next servicing would be. It would not be to take all of that money and try to buy a property, because then you're going to be over leveraged for your next purchase and you're not going to be able to pull that equity out. So ideally what you want to do is, when you put this scenario into a calculator like NAB or CommBank or Westpac online, and put in these figures until you can figure out what your current income allows for, the hypothetical situation of taking out debt of, let's say, in this instance, the 700K, and then seeing how they can borrow again for the next one. They'll figure out very quickly that they won't be able to. So taking that $700,000 down to 6, down to 5, down to 4, down to $300,000 is potentially going to be the value, assuming that the rent return on that property is going to create around 6%, because typically $300,000 properties are achievable at 6% yield, but you've got to find that market. And that will then allow them to pull that equity out when the value comes up inside that property, because their debt will be low compared to the income that it generates. So if you are a lower income earner at that $65,000 bracket, then essentially just make sure that you're buying at a very low price point with an attractive yield for that time when the equity is there to be released to go again. Otherwise, you're going to be over-leveraged. Well, this one actually didn't come through socials, but we had that conversation with a client just the other week around those land taxes inside Victoria, and there being a big sort of negative connotation to the land taxes in Victoria. It's yes, they exist, but they need to be understood. They're not that bad, but there is a different type of land tax, or not necessarily a different type, but it's categorized into two different formats, whether the property is tenanted or not tenanted, right?
Yeah, exactly. So just to break down what land tax is, because a lot of people say, I just hear the taxes in Victoria are extremely high. What they might be referring to is what you're seeing in the news quite a bit. Land tax threshold has dropped down to 50,000. Now, each state has a threshold, and you just don't start paying land tax until the land value is more than the threshold. So New South Wales is $1 million, so you don't start paying land tax until the land value, which is different to the value of the property, the land value is more than $1 million. Queensland, 600,000. Victoria dropped theirs down to 50,000. Mostly everybody's land value is more than 50,000. So now everybody's paying land tax, and that's what really scared off a lot of people. The thing that people are getting confused about, which got a lot of media hype, was the absentee land tax. So people are confusing this. If you have a property in Victoria where it's completely vacant, no one's living there, they're trying to break down or stop people from having these properties, no one living in it. So they've introduced the absentee land tax. So it's an additional tax on top of it. So if you've got a $600,000 land value, in Victoria, you'd be paying about $2,500 land tax. If it's an absentee land tax, now it's about $26,000. So it's 11 times more if you've got a property in Victoria sitting there vacant.
But just to extend on that, that actually only kicks in after the property's been vacant for 6 months. So it's not from the get-go. That doesn't mean that if your property is on the market and it's being listed out and you've got a 3 or 4 week campaign where you don't have tenants inside, you're not going to hit that threshold. It has to be vacant for 6 months.
Exactly. And that's where you're going to hear a lot of people like Sorrento, those type of holiday places are selling off just because they want it sitting there vacant. They don't want to have it, I guess, tenanted, or they just want to be able to go up there wherever they wish. But if it's sitting there vacant for 6 months, as you said, they're now paying a massive land tax. So that's why the land tax threshold scared off a lot of people, because it's dropped to 50,000. People are getting confused with the absentee land tax, which is astronomical. But if you're an investor, you got a tenant in there, don't have to worry about that.
Absolutely. All right, let's go into the last question here, which is about trusts. Should I buy in a trust or out of a trust? Now, I mean, there's a lot of different trusts and there's a lot of different variables to consider inside trusts. What's your take?
I assume most people are talking about discretionary trusts. It's probably the most common in Australia. And it is such a buzzword now. You hear a lot of people, these influencers on Instagram, whatever it might be, always saying buy everything in a trust. Pros and cons to both. Break it down really simple. The pros are you don't own the property, the trust does. So if you hit somebody with a car, you don't own it, the trust does. Secondly, and what a lot of them are referring to is the serviceability. If you can buy at least one more in your personal name, you can set up a trust, buy the property in the trust. Now the debt is being taken up by the trust, not you. So, and that's where people get stuck. How much debt compared to their income? And that's how much banks will obviously allow them to lend, or where they're going to stop lending them. If the property in the trust can wash its own face, the rent covers everything. Water rates, council rates, insurances. There's no expense against your name. So the debt is being taken up by the trust. There's no expense against your name. It's almost as if nothing's ever happened now. You can now go set up another trust, buy another property in that trust, and it allows you to keep buying property, keep moving forward without getting stuck with serviceability. The main thing is that people do leave out the rent has to cover everything for it to not impact you and your serviceability. And then lastly, it's the ability to move money around. So I use a corporate beneficiary, distribute money from the trust to a corporate beneficiary. Some people are doing it with their kids under the age of 18. There's no income. They can put money through their name or through their elderly parents' names, and it goes into an account that they have access to. So a trust allows you to distribute money however you wish. The negatives, which I feel a lot of people don't talk about, setups are usually about $3,500, pretty standard. There's a higher interest rate if you go through trust as well, so it eats into your cash flow. No land tax threshold, except for Queensland. Queensland has a $350,000 land tax threshold. All the others, you start paying land tax from the first dollar. Victoria is actually quite good to buy a trust because the land tax threshold for your personal name is only $50,000. So it doesn't make too much of a difference there. But again, it is eating into your cash flow. And lastly, it's the upkeep of the trust, especially if you're doing with a corporate beneficiary. Your accountant's going to charge you more to do that. So pros and cons to both. The best person to speak to is a financial advisor and accountant, and they'll look at your situation. Think, what should you do for your situation? What we see most people do, rather than just giving a roundabout answer there, most people buy the first one or two in their personal name to get those tax benefits, especially with interest rates where they are. They're claiming, obviously, every expense against the property plus the interest on the mortgage. Everything that's grouped together stays together. So if something's negative cash flow in a trust, you can't claim it against your personal name. So people usually buy the first one or two in their personal name, and then for serviceability reasons, so they don't get stuck, that's when they're going to start buying in a trust. just so the debt is being taken by the trust, not them. They can keep building a portfolio.
Yeah, and it's important to, yes, the debt is considered inside the trust and it doesn't lead on to the next, which is great, but you still have to have that servicing, and that servicing still comes from the beneficiaries. So if you are the beneficiary, your income is still going to be what's considered towards that, towards the servicing, which is great because even the property inside the trust is creating rental income.
Yeah.
And again, like you said, if it is washing its own face, those contributions will flow onto your personal portfolio for the lending for the next properties as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it is case by case. You have to look holistically, especially if you're somebody like a surgeon or running your own business. Then it might just be worth it for the asset protection. So obviously, if you're going to get sued, you've got everything separated. As Rockefeller says, own nothing, control everything. So I think, have you ever heard the story? It was somebody was walking Rockefeller's dog. The dog bit someone. The person wasn't going to do anything until he found out it was Rockefeller's dog.
Yeah.
He thought, I'm going to absolutely rinse this guy, take everything. Rockefeller says, you can take everything I own. Apparently, the only thing he actually owned was a dog. Because everything, even though he was one of the richest people on the planet or in history, everything was separated. Nothing was in his name, but he controlled everything.
And you get quite a few different types of trusts as well. So you've got the SMSF, you've got the bloodline, you've got the corporation trust, family trust, and they've all got their different benefits to what they really can do. I think it's definitely it's a great opportunity to look into, like you said, after your first or second purchase, to try and separate your debt, which is great. And it is certainly a strategy that a lot of investors go down to scale those portfolios beyond the limitations of their personal debt. Great, mate. Thanks for your time. We couldn't get through all the questions today, but we will come back to them next time. Don't let that hesitate our listeners. Please send those questions through. We love hearing from you guys, and it gives us some ideas around the lesser known topics of property investing. So please send them through. Until next time, guys, keep an eye for our next Lazy Equity podcast episode. See you soon.